Hello, I'm Harley Schlanger from the Schiller Institute. Welcome to this week's international webcast featuring our president and founder, Helga Zepp-LaRouche. It's November 8th, 2018, 2 days after the long-awaited midterm elections in the United States. And I think it's fair to say that what many people, including the Democrats and the media, had projected as a blue tsunami, a Democratic massive victory, turned out to be far less than that. In fact, this looks to be a victory for the forces organized by Donald Trump and not coincidentally also by what we were doing. So Helga, why don't we start there? What's your assessment of the results from the midterm election in the United States?
Well, I don't think it's a victory for the Democrats at all, because it is quite usual that in the midterm election, the sitting president gets sort of one blue eye, because people are always discontent about something. That happened, by the way, to Obama as well. And I think that the fact that through the campaigning, actually the active, jetting from one rally to the next on the side of President Trump, this increased the number of the seats in the Senate for the Republicans. And that is actually quite unusual, and I would say fully a success of Trump personally. Now, I think it's very, very important, because this changes the situation inside the United States dramatically, and it has obviously potentials for the strategic situation. Now, just to comment on that, the pro-Trump Republicans generally won. The anti-Trump Republicans in the House generally lost. So I think that in two cases, Trump was able to achieve victory for a Republican Senate in places where Obama also campaigned very heavily. So basically, Trump won out against Obama. And I think this is really creating a very interesting situation. Now, one of the most important results of it, obviously, is that such a firm majority in the Senate means that, it's almost virtually completely impossible that the Democrats would pursue their intention to impeach Trump, because they would have no chance to get it through the Senate. Then a reflection of that is also the invited resignation of Sessions, and that now for the next 200 days, Whitaker is the acting Attorney General, and in that capacity, he is supervising or being on top of the Mueller investigation. And one of the reasons why Schumer and others were completely hysterical is because Whitaker is on record that he already said that Mueller completely overstepped his territory by including a phishing operation against the financial records of Trump and his family, that this had absolutely nothing to do with the investigation into the 2016 election. So I think that is very interesting. However, obviously the investigation into the British coup must continue. And therefore, it would be extremely important, and there should be a public discussion about it, that Trump should absolutely declassify all the documents which have to do with Christopher Steele, with the collusion of the Obama administration with the British intelligence services. And that all must come out, because that is something which absolutely has to be gotten out of the way to free Trump to do what he has to do in respect to Russia and to China. So I think that the first signs which Trump clearly put forward in his press conference, signaling that he is hoping to get a bipartisan collaboration with Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats working on legislation. And I think that the Democratic Party is put in a very obvious situation where either they start to take care of the forgotten men and women in a tradition of Franklin D. Roosevelt, or they keep doing this identity politics, going for the impeachment, which, as I said, is now almost impossible. And that could very well lead to a split in the Democratic Party if they keep doing that. Now, what is obviously needed and very, very urgent is that the necessary economic program is being instilled, which has been to a very large extent lacking from the debates in the campaign, except for what Keisha Rogers did and Ron Wisurek and a few others. But I think what we now need is a full-fledged mobilization on Glass-Steagall, the four laws of LaRouche, and the need to have a new Bretton Woods system. And I think that, since the LaRouche PAC organization, the national campaign of Keisha Rogers, and the campaign to win the future did impact to a very large extent large segments of the US population, especially those voting for Trump. So there is actually a very, very good precondition to escalate that now and really bring in the necessary economic solutions, especially Glass-Steagall, infrastructure, but actually the whole four laws of LaRouche and a new Bretton Woods, new credit system to address the urgent issues internationally. But I think this is not a bad result at all. I think this gives us a tremendous opportunity to move on and actually go towards the solution which the United States and the world urgently needs.
I think just to underscore what you're saying, the media had been talking about a blue wave creating the basis for an impeachment. And instead, we saw a lot of strength in Trump's initiatives, his campaigning. 9 of the 11 senators he campaigned for won, including 4 who defeated Democratic incumbents, and only 1 Republican incumbent who had not been a very strong supporter of Trump lost, and that's Heller from Nevada. Secondly, you mentioned Clinton and Obama. It looks like the Republicans are going to lose something like 30 seats in the House. In 1994, Clinton lost 54 House seats and 8 Senate seats. And in 2010, Obama lost 63 House seats and 6 Senate seats. So this goes against the historic trend, and I think that is the result of Trump emphasizing a couple of key points. And one of them that we've discussed is the post-election diplomatic offensive, because he kept talking at all these rallies about becoming friends with Russia and China. And Helga, I'd like your assessment. We have a couple of summits or meetings and then summits coming up. This is the opportunity for a discussion to go beyond merely ending the dangers of war to actually introducing the economic policies of the new Bretton Woods.
Absolutely. The first such occasion will be actually in 4 days from now, or actually in 3 days from now, in Paris at the occasion of the ending, the armistice of the First World War, which will be celebrated in a huge, series of meetings and conferences in Paris. And originally, there was the plan to have already the first summit between Trump and Putin, because Macron now wants to have, the event as such not overshadowed by such a huge summit between Trump and Putin. They only will have a working lunch, and according to Lavrov, important questions will be already raised there. But I think the real chance to completely change the agenda and really solve the war danger, solve the danger of a financial crash, and go for a completely new kind of a paradigm really exists at the sideline summit to the G20 summit, where you will have a summit between Trump and Xi Jinping and Trump and Putin. And I think this is very important because, despite the fact that you have a complete escalation by the think tanks against China and all kinds of completely wrong accusations, there is actually hope that the discussions between the United States and China are coming back into motion with the orientation to solve the trade war through better means. And I think that, this is a period where the next 3 weeks, in preparation to these important summits, we should have, from the Schiller Institute and all organizations we are working with internationally, we should have a full mobilization that important opportunity must be used to address all the important issues, like the danger of a financial crash, the various urgent development perspectives for Central and Latin America, for Africa, for the reconstruction of Southwest Asia. And it is my view that now that Trump has the back free, so to speak, that he can really go in the direction of a new diplomacy with Russia and China, which he emphasized many times during his rallies, that if these three leaders, Trump, Putin, and Xi Jinping, if they would address the world's problem, not just talking about the bilateral tensions between the United States and Russia and the United States and China, but basically saying that now is the time to really move to a new paradigm and go for a development perspective so that all parts of the world can actually have a good future, what Xi Jinping always calls the shared destiny for the future of humanity, that this would really change the situation. And looking at mankind not from the present status quo of geopolitical tensions, but thinking in terms of humanity from the standpoint of where do we want and where must mankind be 100 years from now. This will be a period where, if things go in the right way, we will have a breakthrough in thermonuclear fusion. We will be able to use it commercially, and that way we will have energy security and raw material security, because you can, through the fusion torch method, basically take all waste, separate it into isotopes, and create new raw materials. And by that time, we also will already have the first steps in the direction of villages on the moon, international cooperation in space, and just humanity growing up and becoming an adult species based on the creativity of the nature of mankind. Now, if that spirit of the joint future would inspire these three presidents, then they would have the inspiration and backing from the whole world, because all the nations of the world need these three leaders to cooperate and provide a vision, and that way you could outflank the opposition in each country, the neocon faction in the United States, the anti-American faction in Russia, which I think does exist, even the hardliners in China, and you could move the whole world into a completely new paradigm. And I think it's something I would call all of you, our listeners and viewers, that you help us in this mobilization, because this is a period where you need the cooperation among the large powers, especially the four powers: United States, Russia, China, India, and then other countries should be joining them, to implement a new Bretton Woods system and to move away from a monetary system to a credit system, and have international cooperation based on a win-win cooperation of everybody. And I think this is not a utopian goal at all, but this is the absolutely necessary next step of humanity if we are to avoid a catastrophe. And that catastrophe is in a certain sense diminished, or the potential for the catastrophe is diminished because of this election result, but the danger is by far not over. And therefore I would really appeal to you, join the Schiller Institute, become a member, help us in this mobilization to move humanity into a new paradigm. And that should really be our main focus for the next 3 weeks going into these summits.
And I think we saw the potential for that at this extraordinary conference underway in Shanghai, where the Chinese government hosted large numbers of people from all over the world, businesses, business leaders, corporate leaders, and heads of state, The reports we're getting show that this is, as you said, a milestone. What is the outcome do you expect from this conference?
Well, I think, first of all, President Xi Jinping gave really an excellent speech. And, while he's a Chinese leader and he speaks with Chinese characteristics, but if you look at the substance of his speech addressing this China International Import Expo, it really reminds you of the approach my husband is taking, the idea that the only source of wealth is the creativity of the human being, leading to scientific and technological progress, which then is applied in the production process, leading to an increase of productivity, better living standard, longer longevity. And Xi Jinping emphasized, that the continuous need for innovation to address all the problems of humanity, that this is the biggest driver, that innovation is what absolutely is the most important for the well-being of humanity as a continuous process. And I think, I would urge people who normally, don't read these things in the Western media, that you should go to Chinese websites and actually look at the speech yourself or read it yourself, because you will see that this is an absolutely coherent spirit, which is really the new Silk Road spirit, and people in the West just don't know it. Now, this conference was remarkable. I mean, there were 400,000 buyers. There are 3,600 firms exhibiting there. There were 128 countries, 18 heads of state, who then most of them had state visits in the adjoining days. And I think the announcement by China that they want to import 40 trillion worth of imported goods in the next years is really also remarkable, because there were some articles commenting on this fair, saying that China responded to an atmosphere of sanctions and trade war exactly in a different direction, namely opening up the Chinese markets more for import. And I think this is really very good, because if you want to overcome the trade deficit between the United States and China, and these are, from the standpoint of economics, clearly the two most important countries on the planet. I mean, there is one way to go into a trade war, which I think people realize is really hurting the American consumer and the American firms. And it's not a viable problem, a way to solve the problem of the deficit. But if you open the market in China more, and it was emphasized that China already has 300 million well-to-do middle-class people, that this will double in the next 10 years, and then will be twice the number of middle-class people and consumers of the United States, and 3 times that of the European Union. So you can see that it is actually of an absolute opportunity for the United States to develop this export market, by China importing more goods, and also then have obviously the basis for joint ventures in third countries, which would require the cooperation between the United States, European nations, other Asian nations, to develop and invest in Latin America, in other Asian countries, in Africa, and that way bring the benefits of all of this to every corner of the world. So I think this expo really shows that China is absolutely serious by creating a win-win platform for cooperation among all of these countries. So I think this was a remarkable thing, and I think it is a very good sign what could actually happen in the summit between Xi Jinping and Trump at the sidelines of the G20, because the chances to solve the trade deal or the trade deficit by making a new deal, which incorporates all of what I just said, is really very, very clearly there. And, the fact that Yang Yiqi was just in the United States, the fact that the trade discussions have resumed, I think this is actually a hopeful sign. And, I'm modestly optimistic that with now the new strengths of Trump, he gained in this midterm election, that road actually can lead to quite good results. I'm carefully optimistic, but since we are not watching this as passive standing on the sidelines, I would really urge all of you, help us to get this agenda on the table.
And Helga, you keep emphasizing, as Xi Jinping does, the importance of mutual benefit. You can look at this other event that's occurring in a couple of days and see what happens when there's no strategy for mutual benefit, only a geopolitical strategy of competition, struggle for markets, control over markets, and so on, which was the march toward World War I as a result of British geopolitics. I know you've thought a lot about the importance of using this event in Paris to prevent us sleepwalking into war once again. And I'd like you to give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think, the fact that World War I happened and, because of the Versailles Treaty, basically not bringing a platform from which peace could develop, leading immediately to World War II. I think, it's really a very important moment to reflect on that and move away from the present dangerous leftovers of this whole situation. Now, the Sarajevo shooting was just the trigger. All the preparations, the pitting one country against another, and all of them pitted against Germany. I mean, that was practically, a chess board which was ready. And the shooting of Sarajevo was just an accidental incident, which could have been anything else, triggering the same kind of war. I think we should learn the lesson from that, because we have not yet moved away from the war danger. I only talked about the potential of Trump, Putin, Xi Jinping, defining a new paradigm. But if you look at the actual situation, first of all, this big NATO maneuver is still going on, or maybe no, it stopped yesterday. So, but this was a clear provocation, and General Dunford, the Joint Chief of Staff, basically said, "Oh no, we are not in a new Cold War. It's just that the United States and Russia are competitors." But there is a clear difference. I don't know what all the Western military are thinking, but I can assure you, and I think I mentioned it last week already, that people in Russia and China, and also in some reasonable places in Europe, are looking at this quite differently. That the NATO expansion to the Russian border, the fact that the US anti-ballistic missile system has been installed already in Romania and is being built in Poland, something which Russia has responded to by developing new weapons based on new physical principles. I mean, this whole situation is very far from being stable, and there were some incidents involving, I think, Russians and US in the context of these maneuvers, and there were several retired military who basically said these kinds of exercises are completely useless. They are provocative and they don't contribute to stability. And I think we should really reflect, now in 3 days, the anniversary of the end of World War I happened, that we really understand that in the time of thermonuclear weapons, we must absolutely move to a different relations and not look at the other as a geopolitical opponent, using enormous military budgets, which really are a complete waste. We have said many times that you can easily retool all of these military industries to produce useful things. If the United States would move to retool its military industry to build fast train systems, new infrastructure, go into a crash program for thermonuclear fusion, cooperate with other nations in space research and travel. I mean, we could use all of these things, and people could even remain wealthy. You know, nobody is proposing to to take the profit away from people who are now stuck in military production, but we could really move all of these productive capacities into a useful situation. The United States urgently needs infrastructure. The United States urgently needs a fast train system, you know, connecting all the major cities and naturally also the subways and the roads and other, you know, electricity production and distribution, communication. I mean, there's so much to do. So, you know, I know that this is going completely against the present kind of thinking, but I think, you know, if the United States would really start to think that they could have a completely different economic policy coming from a new Bretton Woods, cooperating, you know, in these large projects, you know, I think it may sound like a completely far off idea, but, you know, why should we use all our resources eternally for military production, which from a standpoint of physical economy is really a waste? Because it does not, or maybe it does indirectly, you know, because it leads to new technologies. But, you know, you could develop these new technologies directly and they would be much more beneficial for the advancement of civilization. So, you know, I know that this sounds like a very against the zeitgeist idea, but, you know, I think the United States would be much better off if they would develop their domestic economy, as Trump has said many times, make America great again, and build up modern, new civilian technologies to accomplish all of this. And I think that it needs urgently a discussion, and the 4 laws of LaRouche provide the absolute context to do exactly that.
And Helga, I'd like to know what you think are the implications of the Trump victory in the midterm elections in Europe. And we're seeing almost every day a new political shock in Germany with the Brussels bureaucrats, economic crisis, the latest stress tests. And you know, there seems to be, you know, a drift at a point where the rest of the world is moving very deliberately toward this new paradigm. What are the implications of Trump's success? Is this going to have an impact in Europe?
Well, I think, you know, even the first German TV channel, which, according to some surveys in the recent years, only reported 98% negative about Trump. Even they had a pretty objective commentary saying, you know, the blue wave did not take place, or it was very tiny. So that, you know, Trump is now much strengthened. And other, you know, blogs and news basically said that Trump will go to the Paris summit much, much stronger than Merkel and Macron, which is true. And you see actually, you know, that there is a complete absence of any kind of new paradigm in the thinking of the German and French government. Macron came out for the idea of building a European army separate from NATO, which I think is really a lousy idea. Fortunately, the popularity of Macron is in a free fall. So I don't think this will go very far. But the idea of a European army at this point is really reflecting the same old geopolitical thinking, you know, of the EU, which they had already when they supported the plundering of Russia in the 90s during the Yeltsin period. And this is also the present view of the EU, blocking the expansion of the Eurasian rail link from Russia to Slovakia to Vienna. You know, they wanted to have the same gauge, and the EU basically is moving to block that. So, you know, it really is a wrong geopolitical view. Now, I would like to really make the example of the former Prime Minister of Japan, Fukuda, who was or is presently in China preparing the state visit of Prime Minister Abe to China. And he made a very, very interesting speech. He basically said, some years ago, the Japanese economy was number 2 we need in Europe. And, if the United States and Russia and China can hopefully move together, then hopefully we can get the European countries to also, change their views. Now, that obviously requires not Merkel, she's on her way out anyway. And so far, none of her proposed replacements has said anything in the direction what I'm just saying. But that is why the Schiller Institute is so absolutely necessary. So again, join the Schiller Institute and help us, give us your support in any way you can, because, what we are proposing is actually a vision where mankind should be. And, that is urgently required. But I think the hysteria about Trump is probably phasing out, because people realize he may be here to stay, not only for the second part of his first term, but, now that a lot of Bush Republicans are out of the Republican Party, and, if Trump can do domestically what is necessary economically, he has also a very good chance to have a second term. So, it's really the time to change. I think we have an incredible historic opportunity, but we need you, and we need a big activation of everybody who has good intentions for civilization. So join us.
And as Helga emphasized, join us now, because the next 3 weeks will be crucial in not letting this moment slip away, but building on what happened in the elections on Tuesday. So with that, Helga, we'll see you next week. Thank you very much.
Yes, I hope so.